Okay, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed Hanukkah vacation. Today we are going to discuss the topic of free will, freedom of choice. We've touched upon it in the previous semester a bit, so we're going to review that. We're going to go a bit deeper, go into back then, I don't know who remembers, but we raised a question that puzzled the philosophers, all the philosophers throughout the generations for many, many years. And Maimonides has his approach to this question, and he raised the question, but we didn't go really deep into his answer. Today we're gonna go open the guide for the perplexed and see how Maimonides approaches this question. All right. So we'll start with going over what we've already seen in the previous semester on free will. It says Reshut kol adam nituna lo. All right. Every person has reshut. Reshut literally means permission. The word reshut is also used as governance, right? Al titvadda'al larashut, right? You shouldn't, the Hachamim say in Pirkei Avot, you have to be careful when approaching the government or officials because they'll use you for their own needs, right? So rashut is also the government. So it says every person has control over his actions. אם רצה להטות עצמו לדרך טובה ולהיות צדיק, הרשות בידו. The person wants to be inclined towards the path of the righteous. He can do that. That's completely within his power. ואם רצה להטות עצמו לדרך רעה ולהיות רשע, הרשות בידו. And if he wants to go down the path of the wicked and do bad things, do evil, you can do that too. It's completely up to him, up to his own discretion. And this is what the Torah says, הן האדם היה כאחד ממנו לדעת טוב ורע. Right? הן האדם, right? And behold, man has become, I think the more standard translation for this pasuk is man has become as one of us to know or differentiate right from wrong. However, the way Maimonides explains this pasuk doesn't really fit the standard translation. He says, Klomar, what does this mean? Hen min ze shel adam haya echad ba'olam. All right, this species of man is unique, is special in the world. Hen ha'adam, right? It says, behold, man, haya ke'ahad, has become as one, unique, special. In what? Ve'en min sheni dome lo b'zeh ha'inyan, right? No other species in the world is comparable to man in this quality that sheyehu me'atzmo uvda'ato uvmachshavto, right? That he from himself, that's how he explains this pasuk, is one and unique, that he himself can decide what is right and what is wrong, right? From his own action, from his own intellect, from his own understanding. Yodea hatov vehara, he knows or decides what is right and what is wrong. Ve'oseh kol ma shu hafez, and he does whatever he wills to do. Ve'en mi sheya'akev al yado mila'asot hatov o hara, and there's nothing holding man back from his decision to do either right or to do wrong. Ve'kevan shechen hu, says, and therefore, pen yishlach yado, right? Therefore, God set up a barrier before the tree of life, right? So this is what God said after man ate from the tree of knowledge. Right? He said, man has become unique and special in that he can know for himself, decide for himself what is right and what is wrong. And since there's nothing holding man back from making evil and wicked decisions, we must place some sort of protection on the tree of life so that he doesn't destroy that tree as well. אל יעבור במחשבתך הדבר הזה שאומרים טיפשי האומות ורוב גולמי בני ישראל, שהקדוש ברוך הוא גוזר על האדם מתחילת בריאתו להיות צדיק או רשע. He says, there is this common belief. It's prevalent with most of the other nations, with many of the other nations, and also many of the unformed minds, immature minds among the Jewish people, that God has already pre-decided for you whether you are going to be righteous or evil. As if you were born, God said, this one's going to be righteous, this one's going to be evil, this one's going to be righteous, right? Or that he kind of said it in your DNA, in your psychology, as you were born, like he set you up either for failure or for success. It says, this is not true, this is not the case. Kol adam ra'ui lihiyot tzaddik k'Moshe Rabbeinu or rasha k'Yerovam. It says every person, right? He has the opportunity and he has the ability. He's ra'ui. He's right for either being righteous as Moshe himself, or as wicked as Yerovam, one of our wicked kings. Or Hacham, or Sacham, or to be wise, or to be ignorant, or Rahman, or Akhzari, or to be merciful, or to be merciless. What's the word? Akhzari, cruel. Or Chilai, or Shua, or to be generous, or to be what's the opposite of generous? Someone help me out.
Greedy.
Greedy, or to be generous, or to be greedy. And so too with all of the other deot. Who remembers what the meaning of the word deot is? Who can help out? Character trait, right? You think it means your intellect, your opinion, but we saw that the real deeper meaning is it's your own personality, characteristic traits, right? So all of these is within man's own power to decide what is he going to be. And there's no one to force him in any direction. And there isn't anything pulling man, not just forcing him, but pulling him to be either righteous or evil. It's all within man's own decision. Right? Only you can decide which way you're going to go. Right? In Jeremiah, the prophet, he says, God doesn't dictate. It's from the mouth of God, right? He doesn't tell you, right? He doesn't cause good or evil. The cause of good or evil in the world is man's own decisions. And by the way, he says this where? In Megillat Echa, in Lamentations. The book he wrote to lament the destruction of the first temple. He says, no, it wasn't God. God didn't bring this tragedy upon us. All tragedies that we suffer, God didn't bring it upon us. It was the bad decisions of man. More precisely, our own bad decisions contributed to all these tragedies that we have gone through. וכיוון שכן הוא. Right? כלומר, אין הבורא גוזר על האדם לא להיות טוב ולא להיות רע. So, God doesn't make man or force him to be good or evil. וכיוון שכן הוא, נמצא זה החוטא הוא הפסיד על עצמו. Says, therefore, the person who sins, who does something wrong, he is primarily injuring himself. He is acquiring a bad trait in his own nefesh. ולפיכך ראוי לו לבכות ולקונן על מה שעשה לנפשו וגם לה רעה. Right? And so that's why a man, when he sins, says the biggest destruction that he did was to himself. If you stole money, you stole 100 shekels from someone, right? So you caused him damages that could be quantified in 100 shekel, right? The damage that you did to yourself by stealing 100 shekels, you can't quantify in 100 shekels. 100 shekels is nothing. But you acquired that trait of stealing. It doesn't matter if it was 1 shekel, 100, or 1,000,000. Right? You destroyed your own soul. הוא שכתוב אחריו, מה יתאונן אדם חי, גבר על חטאיו. Says, this is again, we're still in the book of Lamentations. Jeremiah is saying, what should a man be distressed over, should cry over? He says, on his own sins that he did. Because we destroyed ourselves, we corrupted ourselves. As a society, we corrupted our ways. And all this contributed to the destruction and to the tragedies that are befalling us. וחזר ואמר, הואיל ורשותנו בידינו. Then he says, like, have no worries. Since it's all up to our own decisions, ומדעתנו עשינו כל הרעות, and because we ourselves cause all this evil, ראוי לנו לחזור בתשובה ולעזוב רשענו. Says, we can also repent. We can also fix what we destroyed. שהרשות עתה בידינו, right? Because we still have this governance, this power to decide our actions. הוא שכתוב אחריו, and this is what it comes next, נחבשה דרכינו ונחקורה ונשובה עד אדוני. Says we shall search within, search our pathways, search our behaviors, right? Investigate and return and fix and do better. ועיקר זה עיקר גדול. Says, and this is a fundamental concept in Judaism. והוא עמוד התורה והמצווה. And this is the pillar on which the Torah that we received from God relies on. Because if you have no freedom of choice, then there is no mitzvah. God cannot command you to do right or wrong if you have no freedom to choose to do right or wrong. This is one of the most fundamental pillars of the Torah. שנאמר, right, God said, and it says, ראה נתתי לפניך היום את החיים ואת הטוב. It says, behold, I have set before you, presented before you two pathways where I gave you life and good, and on the other hand, ואת המוות ואת הרע, right, and death and evil. וכתוב, ראה אנוכי נותן לפניכם היום ברכה וקללה. And it says in Perashat Re'eh, it says, behold, I gave you both a blessing and a curse. And it's up to you to choose which way you want to go. כלומר, שהרשות בידכם. It's in your hands. וכל שיחפוץ האדם לעשות, ממעשה בני אדם, עושה בין טובים בין רעים. And man has the will.
Sorry, could I ask something or not later?
Yes, no, please.
Yeah. Like, is that when, like you say, everyone chooses, and then does that mean on Yom Kippur where everyone does teshuva, but then the gates are shut and Hashem's already decreed what's going to happen, whether you live or die, you're rich, you're poor. Is
Yeah.
that all the consequences of your action?
Right. It's always the consequences of your actions. So, but we saw in the previous semester, in the short Elul semester, where we were dealing with the concept of teshuvah more in depth, is that you're judged as an individual, and then you're also judged as part of a collective, as part of the society. And the entire world is also judged as part of a collective, and that's where the decisions are made. And because of this, that man can decide what to do. God says, "Mi ten." He says, if only, right, their hearts were like fixed and would go in my ways. What do you mean, if only? You're God, you're almighty, you're all powerful. You want them to behave a certain way, make them behave in a certain way. He says, no, but God is saying, if only they would listen to what I have to say. Meaning, God doesn't decide for us how to behave. And right? He doesn't force people to do things. Right? Their hearts, their souls, their decisions and their thoughts are under their reign. They decide how to behave. They have control. אילו היה האל גוזר על האדם להיות צדיק או רשע, או אילו היה שם דבר שמושך את האדם ועיקר תולדתו לדרך מן הדרכים, או למדע מן המדעות, או לדעה מן הדעות, או למעשה מן המעשים, right? It says, if God would make people behave in a certain way, or he would create man with a certain inclination that he can't overcome, right? That would make people think in a certain way, behave in a certain way, adopt certain characteristics that they have no control over. This is the way the astrologers believe that everything, your entire life is planned out for you and you have no control over what you do. How then can God come and send prophets to us to tell us, do this, stay away from that, build this wall, repent, whatever it is that he sends the prophets to do? What's the purpose of sending the prophets if we have no choice? He says, repent, do better, stop going in your evil ways. Right? It's already been decided for him if he's going to do well or wrong. So why is God sending messengers? Right? Can you get mad at a cat for not chasing a mouse? No, it's in his nature. That's what he's designed to do. If we were designed to behave in a certain way, and we have no control over these instincts and inclinations, then there's no point in commanding us to do something else, something that's not within our control. And what place is there for the entire Torah? It's filled with 613 of these commandments. Right? And then What justice can God do? What's he going to judge you on if you had no choice? השופט כל הארץ לא יעשה משפט. Says the judge of the entire universe is not going to conduct a fair trial. He's not going to do justice. לפיכך דנין אותו לפי מעשיו. Therefore, we are judged according to our actions, because our actions is what we have control over. אם עשה טובה, מטיבין לו, ואם עשה רעה, מרעים לו. Right? If he did well, then he gets how do you call it? Gets repaid for that. He gets into olam haba. אם עשה רעה, if he did evil, then he'll get punished for it. הוא שהנביא אומר מידכם הייתה זאת. Right? So what does the Navi say? He says, the destruction of the temple, well, you grind. You did it. You know, it came from your hand, from your own actions. ובעניין זה אמר שלמה, and then Shlomo says, שמח בחור בילדותך. He says, rejoice while you were young, right? You can do this, you can do this, you can party every night. ודע, but you should know, כי על כל אלה יביאך האלוהים במשפט, right? But everything you're going to be held accountable for. כלומר, דע שיש בידך כוח לעשות. Says, know that it's within your power to do, to perform however you like, but in the end, ועתיד אתה ליתן את הדין. Right? You're going to have to justify your behavior at the end. You're going to stand on trial. It says, שמת אומר, והלא הקדוש ברוך הוא יודע כל מה שיהיה קודם שיהיה. Right, so this is the question, the difficult question that all the philosophers have asked. It says, well, God knows everything that is going to be before it happens. So therefore, ידע שזה צדיק או רשע, או לא ידע, says, therefore he must know if a person is going to be righteous or he's going to be wicked. So, does he know or does he not know? אם ידע שהוא יהיה צדיק, says, if God knows in advance that this person is going to be righteous, then he has to be righteous, otherwise God is wrong. Can God be wrong? Says, no, that's one of our, we already established that God is never wrong. So if God is never wrong, and he knows that a certain person is going to be righteous, and he can't be wrong, then that person has to be righteous. It's kind of like saying that it was already decided that this person is going to be righteous. ואם תאמר שידע שיהיה צדיק ואפשר שיהיה רשע. Okay, so you say, well, God knows that this person is going to be righteous. However, he can still decide to do evil, right? And become wicked. So he said, well, then God doesn't really know. Does he know or does he not know? Everyone understand the question? We have two opposing, call it axioms, two opposing fundamental beliefs. One is that man has free will and can decide if he's going to be righteous or wicked, and not even God interferes with that. And the other principle is that God knows everything in advance, and God is never wrong. And he knows the future. And so if he knows if a person is going to be righteous or wicked, then that kind of takes away that person's freedom of choice. Right? Does everyone agree?
Yes.
Right. So
Yeah.
now,
But both are correct, no?
what's that?
He knows previously, but also he gave us the power to decide what we will do with our lives. So both
Right.
affirmations are correct, right?
Sorry, yeah, both principles are correct. However, they contradict each other. In the case of man's decision, free will, they kind of contradict each other. So how does it fit in?
Hashem makes like not when he knows that you are going to choose to go into bad decisions, he doesn't give you so much that you have too many debts. How do you say the
It's
hayab?
you walk out of your house, you have a choice. You can turn left or you can turn right. Right? You don't know, but before you step out of your house, you're not sure if you're going to turn left or right. Maybe you think you're going to go left and then you see something to the right, so you turn right, right? Who made that decision to turn left or right?
You yourself.
You did. No, not me. You did. Did God know if you were going to turn left or right?
Yes.
God knew.
Yes.
Yeah, because he
He
said
knew
to
what you were
Moses,
going to do before you knew what you were going to do.
yeah. That's like with Pharaoh. He said to Moses, go there, but he's not going to let you go. So you
Okay.
find out what's
That's
the
an
use of
interesting
asking?
point. However, Pharaoh was punished with his freedom of choice being taken away from him.
So he had no choice. Wow.
That was later on, though. Later on, he had no choice. At the beginning, he still did have choice.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Maybe not relevant. I before I read a story about the Bashan Tov. So once Bashan Tov want to turn right of the room, but in the end he turned left the room. He doesn't know why he turned left, and then he found the mezuzah inside the Torah of the mezuzah, the lost some words. They need to fix it.
Okay.
So it's like
So
I
that's
think like
interesting
Hashem,
because you're saying he
yes.
did something without even knowing what he was doing. And you're saying
It's like
this
a
already goes
two,
into the question of divine providence. We'll have a class on divine providence too.
yeah. So I want to
Eh,
say is in this case, like Hashem also guide us sometimes.
Right. So it's
doesn't
a
it
topic that
say in
touches upon this topic, but it's different. Yes, Juliet.
Juliet, you want to say something?
You want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I thought you could hear me. I realized I didn't have my mic on. Doesn't it say in Daniel that there can come a time when the wicked are going to get more wicked and the righteous are going to get more righteous? So there's a cut-off point in Daniel. I read some years ago.
But that could be more like a prediction because he doesn't say who's going to be. He says the wicked in general will become more wicked.
That's the time
Okay.
you're in.
All right, so let's get back to Maimonides' question and answer. So he says, know this. Shuvat she'elazu aruka me'eres midah ulhava miniyad. He says the answer to this question is very, very deep. He said this is a question that has puzzled, perplexed the philosophers for generations. V'kama ikarim gedolim v'hararim meramim tenuim ba. Right? And some very fundamental principles of Judaism are dependent on the two opposing principles, right, of this question. It says, but you need to understand what I'm saying here, what I'm going to tell you. It says, בפרק שני מהלכות יסודי התורה, right? We already explained in the second chapter of הלכות יסודי התורה, right? We studied this maybe our third or fourth class, שהקדוש ברוך הוא אינו יודע בדעה שיחוס ממנו כבני אדם שהן ודעתם שניים. Right, so we're going back to one of our earlier classes in this course. He says, the knowledge of God is not similar to the knowledge of man. You can't judge God's knowledge the same way that you do man's knowledge. He says, because God doesn't know in an external knowledge to himself. You say man's knowledge is acquired. What we know, we need to study, we need to investigate and learn and acquire it. It's external to us. It says God's knowledge is him himself. It says, Hu hayodeh hu yadua hu asma. Right? He is the one that knows, he is the one that is known, he is the knowledge itself. So he is, him and his knowledge is one thing, it's unified. Right? So God himself and his knowledge is one, it's singular. Right? But this concept is a very difficult and deep concept that man's intellect is too limited to fully understand. וכשם שאין כוח באדם להשיג ולמצוא אמיתת הבורא, שנאמר כי לא יראני האדם וחי, כך אין כוח באדם להשיג ולמצוא דעתו של בורא. It says in the same way that man's intellect is too limited to understand God himself, right? As it says, because man cannot perceive me while alive. Remember when we studied that, Moshe wanted to understand God fully. And we said, well, a human being is incapable of that. That's impossible. It's the same way that we're limited, that we can't understand that, so too we can't understand the chasm between God's knowledge and man's knowledge. Because it's not just it's not difference in quantity. God knows a lot more than we do. Said it's categorically different. It's a completely different type of knowledge. And soon when we go into the Moreh, to the guide for the perplexed, we'll see one quality of that difference. הוא שהנביא אומר כי לא מחשבותיי מחשבותיכם ולא דרככם דרכיי. Right, this is what the prophet says. And I think this is also Yirmiyahu. He says, your thoughts are not like my thoughts. Your pathways aren't like mine. Right? We don't think the same way. We don't know things the same way. Not, I'm a lot wiser than you. It's, we see things completely differently. וכיוון שכנו אין בנו כוח לידע האח ידע הקדוש ברוך הוא כל הבירואים ומעשיהם. And therefore, because our minds are completely different than God's mind, we cannot understand or we cannot conceptualize how God knows everything and all the creatures' actions. How is that answer for you? Maimonides got a lot of criticism for this. One of his biggest critics, Rabbi Avraham Abedin, the Ra'avad from France, he says, why do you raise this question that you can't answer? He says, you're raising a question, putting doubt in your readers' minds, and you're saying, you should know that man can't understand the answer to this question. So why do you raise it? But the answer is that this Ra'avad, this critic, his criticism, he didn't understand the answer. It says Maimonides explained the answer, not to death. He didn't say there's this great question, but there's no answer for it. I'm sorry. You're too stupid to understand the answer. That's not what Maimonides said. Maimonides said, the answer to this question is that the knowledge of God is categorically different than the knowledge of man. So while you're thinking, well, if I know that someone is going to turn left and not right, then that means he's definitely turning left and not right. God's knowledge isn't like that. It doesn't behave that way. All right? We're going to skip into the guide. It says, Davar muskam ledivrei hakol. Everyone agrees on this principle. Shehu yit'aleh lo yitachen shetithadesh lo yedi'ah. Right? That God cannot have a new knowledge. Because if God has new knowledge, if all of a sudden he knows now something that he didn't know previously, that means, one, his knowledge wasn't complete. Two, God changes. And that's impossible because God is not under the realm of time. So God is constant, never changes. As we already saw in the first chapter of Yesodei HaTorah, he doesn't get happy, doesn't get sad. Nothing can cause God to change. So if it's impossible for God to acquire new knowledge, עד שידע אתה מה שלא ידע אותו מקודם, ולא ייתכן שיהיו לו ידיעות רבות חלוקות, and he can't have competitive knowledge, contradicting knowledge. Okay, so all the philosophers agree that God knows everything, okay, and he can't acquire new knowledge. וכיוון שהוכח דבר זה, and this has been substantiated among the philosophers, that God has no new knowledge, אמרנו אנו קהל התורתיים, so we say, right, we the people who follow the Torah, we say, כי בידיעה האחת יודע הדברים הרבים החלוקים, so that with one perception he knows all the contradicting possibilities. He knows all the possibilities of what could happen. He says, knowledge as it develops over time in the world does not change for God. Meaning, he knew Sarah turning left and Sarah turning right. He knew both of them. What does that mean? We'll see a bit later. Right? It's not the same as our knowledge. We'll say our knowledge of what we actually saw taking place. Right? So everything that develops in the world, God knew about in advance. And therefore, God will never have new. For instance, the world's been around for many, many, many years. All right. Only God knows exactly how many. However, a person was born January 1st, year 2000. All right. When that person was born, nobody knew of his existence, beforehand. We acquired new knowledge. Something new took place. And this person is going to live 120 years and then pass out of this world into the next. that may come as a surprise to the people around him. Oh, now they knew this person is deceased. People living another 120 years. But this is all new to us. None of this was new to God. When God created the universe, he knew that this person was going to be born. And he was going to live so and so years. And then he was going to die and pass away. Right? כי ידיעתו שפלוני הוא עתה נעדר ועתיד להימצא בזמן פלוני, right? That a person doesn't exist now, he's going to come into existence at a certain period of time, he'll live for certain many years, and then he'll be gone from this world, right? הרי כאשר נמצא אותו האיש כפי שקדמה ידיעתו, לא נוספה שום ידיעה ולא נתחדש מה שלא ידוע לפניו. Right? So for God, this wasn't anything new to him. ומתחייב לפי דעה זו, right? And so based on this, we understand שתהא הידיעה שייכת בהיעדרים ומקיפה גם מה שאין סוף. Right? That God's knowledge encompasses also things that don't exist, that aren't in existence, and also things that have no end. If God is infinite, he has infinite capacity for knowledge, for possibilities. ולכן באנו לידי דעה זו ואמרנו, therefore we say, כי ההיעדרים אשר קדם בידיעתו להמציאם, והוא יכול להמציאם, אין מן הנמנע שתהא ידיעתו שייכה בהם. So we say, the absent things that don't exist yet, right? But they could exist. This can all be contained within God's knowledge. Is that understood? I'd be surprised if anyone said yes.
Understood.
Okay. I'm going to go one step back. Maimonides divides the world into three, right? There's Mehuyav HaMetziut, or he divides reality into three types of reality. Mehuyav HaMetziut is things that have to exist because without them, there is no universe. Or I should more correctly say, thing. There's one thing that is Mehuyav HaMetziut, and that's God himself. Another category of existence is Na'idar HaMetziut, things that are impossible, that can't possibly exist. And another category is called Efshari HaMetziut, anything that is a possibility, right? Turning left or turning right, each one of those is a possible outcome. And that is a category of reality. So there's what has to exist, which is God himself. There is what can't possibly exist. And there is the possibilities. Anything that can possibly happen falls under the category of Efshari HaMetziut. It's possible existence. All right? And that could either materialize or not materialize. אבל מה שלא יימצא כלל, זהו העדן המוחלט. All right? But what can possibly, that's okay, we'll skip this. ואשר אני אומר, and what I'm trying to say, שכל מה שנכשלו בו כולם, is what everybody, right, what perplexed all of the philosophers, סיבתו מפני שעשו בין ידיעתנו וידיעתו יתעלה יחס. He says the reason why they all failed to answer this question was because they compared between the mind of man and the mind of God, when there's no relation between them at all. Because we only perceive things that materialize. God's understanding encompasses all possibilities. Anything that's ifshari hamitziyut, anything that's a possible outcome, is contained within God's knowledge. God knows all possible outcomes, right? וממה, all right? ורואה כל כד בדברים, all right? וממה שנתברר מאוד מפסוקי התורה, and this is also what we see in the psukim of the Torah, כי ידיעתו יתעלה במציאות אפשרי מצוין שיהיה, אינה מוציאה אותו האפשרי מטבע האפשרות כלל. He says that God's understanding of a possible outcome does not dictate that outcome. And that is a categorical difference between our understanding, our knowledge, and God's knowledge. By the way, is there any scientist, physicist here in the class? No. Okay, so we're gonna play a little video that's gonna help understand this. What's amazing here is that Maimonides is writing down one of the greatest discoveries of the past century in quantum mechanics. He wrote this 900 years ago. And הטבע האפשרות נשארת בו, right? So as long as something is possible, God's understanding, knowledge encompasses all possibilities and doesn't decide any of the outcomes of those possibilities. Who decides the outcome?
God.
God, with his decisions.
Yeah.
ושאין הידיעה במה שיהיה מדברים האפשריים מחייבת הווייתו בהכרח על אחת משתי אפשרויות. And God's knowledge of two possibilities does not make one of them materialize. וגם זה מיסודות תורת משה אין בו ספק ולא ויכוח. And this is one of the fundamental principles of the Torah that nobody disputes, meaning none of the Hachamim, none of the Jewish Hachamim dispute that God doesn't decide any outcome. Right? We have one commandment specifically that says, you shall put a gate on the roof of your house, to prevent people from possibly falling over. Meaning, we have mitzvot to deal with possibilities.
Yes, above. No. Obrigado. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to play. Anybody know here of Dr. Quantum? We'll play a 5-minute video here.
And here we are, the
And everybody hear it well?
granddaddy of all quantum weirdness,
Thank you.
the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So when we throw things, that is matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How the pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they can interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently. So it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So one of the greatest discoveries in physics, or the last real breakthrough in physics, was based on this experiment that took place. Most physicists still don't have a comprehensive answer as to why the quantum world, the world of really small particles, behaves this way. But what they see is that, well, we saw two things here. One is that all possibilities exist in superposition to each other. I recommend seeing this video again and again and again. All right, I'll send the link to Dr. Quantum video. I'll send it to Bracha to share. One is that all possibilities exist in superposition to each other. And the other thing is that the observer being man or man's knowledge, is what in the end dictates one of those two possibilities. All the possibilities existing in superposition to each other, that's what he calls the wave of potentials, that is the categorical difference between man's knowledge and God's knowledge. God's knowledge encompasses all possibilities, because if a possibility didn't exist in God's knowledge, that possibility doesn't exist. In order for something to possibly exist, God needs to have knowledge of it. However, his knowledge doesn't dictate what possibility materializes. For that, he created man. And this is also another way to understand what the image of God is, because God created man to be kind of like a co-creator with God. Because God created a universe of possibilities, and he created man to materialize these possibilities, to decide which reality of all the possible realities that God created, which reality are we going to create and live in? It says, "V'nachem yitbonen b'kama nekudot nivdalot yedi'ato midi'atenu." Come and see how many things are different between our understanding and God's. One is that his understanding encompasses everything. Two, shayachuta b'ma she'eno matzui. God's understanding or knowledge encompasses things that don't exist. Shayachuta b'ma she'eno sof. Right? God's understanding or knowledge encompasses infinity, meaning infinite possibilities. The fourth difference is that God's knowledge doesn't change with the development of new things. Fifth, says God's observation, I'm changing to what the video was saying, God's observation does not collapse the wave of potentials, does not decide one out of the many different possibilities. Ours does. It says, "Umi iten efo v'yadati be'ezet davar dameta yedi'atenu yedi'atu." Says, and for the life of me, Maimonides is saying, can somebody please explain to me in what way, show me one thing that is similar between God's knowledge and man's knowledge. Says, the whole premise of this question of how is it that God can know, right, if a man is going to be righteous or man is going to be wicked, and does that dictate whether man is going to be righteous or wicked? He said, the whole premise of that question is assuming that God's knowledge is similar in any way to our knowledge. In another place, he says, the only thing that our knowledge has in common with God's knowledge is the word knowledge. For a lack of a better word, we use the word knowledge to refer also to God's knowledge and also to ours. Although there is absolutely no connection between them, no relationship. They're two completely different things. Ever hear of phrase, the reader is the writer? Now, once a writer writes his book and surrenders it to the public, right? Every reader of the book, he reads his own things into it. He becomes the author of his version of the book he's reading. So God wrote the book, and we are the readers of this book. And when we read God's book, we kind of decide how it's going to develop. So God gave us the power not just to choose which way we're going to go, but he made us co-creators of the world with him by giving us this freedom of choice. Any questions?
Sammy, may I say something?
Of course.
I'm a bit sick, so you might not hear me too clear. But I find it very, very interesting. The knowledge of God is God. He gave us a limitation because we are, like you said, co-creators. And I'm so happy that we're not further than him, because knowledge is a lot of work.
Knowledge is a lot of work.
I think so. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And we'll learn more about it also when we study about the divine providence.
Yes, and he's God, and to me it is showing, and I will like to look at it because I was explaining to my daughter, do not expect to know everything at the same time. Everything have its time, and everyone have their place. Also, like when you go to school and the teacher teaches you, there are 10 people, the same lesson, all perceive it in their own way.
Right, right.
So that's what.
Not only
So
that, but it's also everybody's own responsibility afterwards to further develop the ideas that they learn.
Yeah, but you seek it, you
to own them, to own the ideas.
Yes, yes. I find it very interesting. Very interesting.
Me too, me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
I found it very clear. It makes so much sense.
Oh,
Yes.
that's good. That's good.
It makes so much sense, you know, that,
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I love this kind of, it makes you think, it wakes you up.
Yeah, that's one of my objectives in my classes, to make you think.
Yeah, yeah. It does. It does. I find it very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any clarification?
No. Yeah, no, I'm just looking forward to seeing the video again, because I can't make head or tail of it.
Yeah. You shouldn't feel alone.
Yeah.
Anybody here this famous phrase, God doesn't play dice?
Yeah.
And anybody hear that?
No.
Okay, so
Explain, please.
the person who said it was Einstein, Albert Einstein, you know, the father of the theory of relativity. Quantum mechanics came after relativity, and Einstein couldn't understand it. He refused to accept it, and the famous phrase that he said to coin his objection to quantum mechanics was, God doesn't play dice. Because, I mean, further in quantum mechanics, you learn about, since it's a wave of potentials, an electron isn't in one place, is only probably somewhere. So there's a lot of probability in it. And Albert Einstein himself couldn't wrap his mind around quantum mechanics, which is substantiated science. We have tons of technology today that is based on quantum mechanics, so we know it's proven true science. So if you can't wrap your mind around quantum mechanics, you can be happy that you're in the same class as Albert Einstein.
Or they could buy the encyclopedia books that used to go wrong before.
Hmm.
Do you know those books, Sammy?
Which books?
Those encyclopedia books?
Yeah, I still used encyclopedias when I was young.
Yeah, yeah. I had them, but I had to
I
read.
didn't have Google as a kid.
Yeah, they are very good. They help my nephew in school a lot.
That's good.
Yeah. But thank you. Thank you. I love it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
pleasure.
Right. Thank you. I have to go now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good
Any other
night.
questions? Or until next week.
Okay.